In the last video, I started to talk about a traditional model of research. Another important aspect of this model is the roles it assigns to researchers and other stakeholders. In this video, I'm going to look at who's supposed to do what within a traditional model of research. Let us again consider the link between cigarette smoking and lung cancer. By the 1960s, cigarette smoking was a worldwide phenomenon. It had social and cultural significance. It was an industry with jobs, taxes, and profits. For a lot of people, it was cool, enjoyable, and a part of their daily routines. Sadly, there were also patients, hospital costs, losses to families, and deaths. So who was impacted by cigarettes? Governments, taxpayers, businesses, workers, families, healthcare providers, the public. They all had some stake in the question whether cigarette smoking was associated with the rise of lung cancer cases. Asphalt dust was also an early factor considered for the rise of lung cancer cases. That product would have had a different, but similarly large, range of impacted stakeholders if the evidence took us down that route. At times, scientists have made determinations that contradict the positions held by governments, cultural communities, churches, etc. But there's a belief that society on the whole benefits from scientists avoiding these pressures, that there's a value in the ideal of researchers being focused on determining and being transparent about what, to the best that they can determine, is true about the world. On this model, the role for researchers is to carefully examine and experiment around their topic of study to best determine what is the case, and to use that knowledge to determine which interventions are likely to bring about which outcomes. It's part of the research condition that everyone sees things from some perspective, that there's no completely objective vantage point. But researchers can still try their best to balance off any known or unknown biases in delivering the most accurate account of what is occurring. While researchers always approach their work from some perspective, like judges in the legal system, we want them to be as neutral and as fair as possible in their critical assessment of the evidence, and when determining which theory best fits with the available evidence. Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman even promoted adversarial collaborations. The idea is if researchers disagree in their assessment of what's going on, it's an opportunity to work together to get closer to what actually is the case. As Cass Sunstein writes, researchers are not trying to win, but to figure out what's true. Given this shared focus on trying to figure out what actually is happening, scientists coming to different conclusions should be able to work together, perhaps even co-design experiments. Researchers should also be willing to abandon their position if the evidence no longer supports it. But as we know, identifying the main cause of lung cancer is only the beginning of another story. How should we act on what researchers determine is the case? And who should be involved in making those decisions? The traditional model of research splits the role of the researcher and those who act on that knowledge. On this traditional model, researchers report their evidence for what is the case and the likely impacts of potential interventions. The balancing of priorities and the cost of interventions needed to enact changes are seen as decisions better suited for the political, societal realm, to be made by the public and policymakers. In 1964, the U.S. Surgeon General's report declared a definitive link between cigarette smoking and lung cancer. While researchers continued to develop more evidence, after the Surgeon General's report, various decision makers, stakeholders, and others in the public played an increasingly important role in bringing about changes in light of the compelling evidence for a link. It was no longer a question of what was causing lung cancer cases, but determining what actions and investments society should take in light of what we now know. While researchers report their evidence, in making their decisions about what to do, the public and policymakers decide how much they use that information. The extent to which decisions are based on or reflect the available research evidence is ultimately a political question. Many researchers take on the role of being both a scientist and advocating for the adoption of interventions or calling for societal actions to address the situations they study.
In the traditional model, as a scientist, they remain committed to determining what is the case as best they can. Scientists take on their advocacy separately. In other words, in the traditional model, their research and their advocacy don't become the same activity. So far in this playlist, I've been throwing around some big words. For example, the natural world, the social world, truth, causes. In the next video, I'll discuss the connection between philosophy and research. Thanks for watching.